Okay, so harken back to your childhood. You're watching your favourite piece of media. Things seem pretty wholesome enough. But then, either it may be an episode.
They have seen the little engine trying to get home, but he never reaches the other side.
Or a character and moment.
Men came, filled in the burrows, couldn't get out. Wallen, earth, roots, grass.
And it makes you feel rather unease. So, as a humble Brit, allow me to bring you through several creepy and disturbing movies and shows where for one reason or another, my country deemed these to be suitable for children's entertainment. Feel free to tell me in the comment sections down below if you either saw or found any of these things scary when you were a kid. And of course, only being limited to 20 options for the list. Let me know if I've missed out any other creepy children's content from the UK. Alrighty, that will do for the context. Let's start the countdown. Doctor Who, amongst the longest running programmes in the world, has had its fair share of scary and controversial moments. One of the most polarising serials back in the day was the 1976 storyline, The Deadly Assassin. This was the episode that expanded on the Time Lord mythology, and the one that establishes that a Time Lord can typically regenerate 12 times. Although this may have added too much initial lore for Doctor Who fans back in the day, while today Deadly Assassin is established as one of the Doctor Who masterpieces, it was not so loved on initial broadcast, with no other storyline up until this point exploring the Gallifreyan culture. Doctor Who fans felt that it spoiled the mystery of the Time Lords, removing the Who of the Doctor title. But the controversy expanded further than just the Doctor Who fandom. The story featured the long-awaited return of the Master. Unfortunately, the original man who played the Master, Roger Delgado, had passed away some years prior, so the show took advantage of completely reinventing the character. The Master now had used up all of his regenerations, and is just barely clinging to life, with his final form being a rotting corpse, with his face purposely only meant to be just a skull with the thinnest layer of flesh left. The crew were initially worried if it was perhaps too much for small children, but ultimately decided to, well, screw the kids. But the Master was far from being the most scariest thing from the story. Oh no. You see, in the story, the Doctor enters the Matrix. Now, for those of you who want to draw comparisons to the Wachowskis' Matrix, well, you actually wouldn't be that far off, as the Doctor Who Matrix is the same as the movie's Matrix. In the computer simulation, the Doctor fights another Time Lord named Goth. By part 3 of the serial, Goth has got the Doctor by the knuckles of his neck and begins struggling and drowning him under the water, ending that for the cliffhanger of part 3. Very shortly after the episode was transmitted, the National Viewers and Listener Association complained to the BBC, feeling that the episode contained too many upsetting moments for small children. A particular vocalist was a lady by the name of Mary Whitehouse.
The final shots of the programme, with the image that was left in the mind of the child for a whole week.
But Mary Whitehouse in the eyes of the media was always seen as a bit of a buzzkill.
I would pray that Mrs. Whitehouse had watched the programme and thought it was too violent, because it automatically put 2 million viewers on our audience figures.
The controversies were significant enough for the BBC to caution them into slightly re-editing the episode when it was re-ran several years later, removing the vital shot of the Doctor drowning in the water.
You're finished.
But this has since been fully restored back to the original version on DVD and Blu-ray. But this wasn't the only Doctor Who story that raised an eyebrow from Miss Whitehouse. 11 years prior, she was most displeased with the Doctor Who story, The Daleks' Master Plan. In the 12-part special, many of the Doctor's companions were killed off in the adventure. The one that had the most gruesome death was Sarah. She was exposed to the Daleks' secret weapon, the Time Destructor, where she grisly aged to death. Sadly, the episode it occurred in, part 12, is currently missing in the BBC archive, so we only have fragments of behind-the-scenes pictures to go off on how grim it must have been. Rumours persist that the original edit was far more terrifying. Frames and shots had to be removed out for the final broadcast. While there might be an ever so slim chance that the broadcast episode might turn up one day, the original cut is no doubt lost forever. Test cars was a common old-fashioned practice for the early days of TV networks. Test cards would usually be transmitted when there was no programmes on, such as late nights and the afternoons, prior to Britain's daytime television. The purpose of the test card was to give broadcasters the chance on testing transmissions on both sound and picture quality. In 1967, the BBC created Test Card F, the first one to be devised for colour television, with young 8-year-old Carol Hersey as the model in the image, accompanied by her homemade clown. The idea for the image came from her technician dad, George Hershey, who pitched the concept of Test Card F to the BBC. The reason he suggested having a human model in the image, so they could as well test human skin tones. George additionally insisted to have it as a young girl, as since children's clothing remains more timeless than adult fashion, and while he took pictures of his daughters as a prototype, he didn't suspect his eldest daughter to be within the final test card. Test Card F was perhaps the most famous out of all the test cards that were ever made by the BBC. In fact, it was in common use for over 30 years. And while the image is moderately innocent, I've spoken to quite a number of people over the years who grew up during this time in television, who can recall feeling rather uneasy with the test cards, with Test Card F being no exception, where if they tuned in on the TV before any scheduled programmes, for many hours it would only be this image that would be transmitted. There may have been some stock music, or it may have just played in silence. Perhaps their fear derives from a calm before the storm scenario. It's hard to describe, but I'm sure we've all encountered some kind of corporate or company logo, where it made us feel a bit uncomfortable before the main presentation would begin. I mean, you put in the videotape and you're about to watch Teletubbies, and then suddenly you get this logo. Now, surely some of you can relate. Terrorhawks was the first puppet series created by Gerry Anderson since the 1960s. Well known for his shows that used marionette puppets such as Thunderbird, Captain Scarlet, Stingray and many more. Unable to afford the studio space that could accommodate 6-foot strings for marionettes, it was decided as a cost-saving measure to make the characters into latex hand puppets, formatting the new trademark filmed in super macromation. The latex of the puppets made their skin seem ever so slightly more realistic, but still having the unhuman proportions of the Thunderbird models. It gave the human puppets an uncanny look. It was one of the biggest critiques of the show that the puppets just looked far too unflattering for their own good. Although they don't hold a candle to the terrifying appearance of the villains, as many British kids who grew up watching the show back in the 80s deemed the alien characters to be the most terrifying aspect of Terrorhawks. The leader of this bad batch was Zelda, easily the most scariest villain out of them all, thanks to her terrifying demeanour of looking like a rotting zombie. Her son and sister take on board the same zombified mummy look. The way they move and behave is on an equivalent of a pantomime performer, moving very hyperactive and erratically. While the series may have not been initially loved by Gerry Anderson fans on its original release, it slowly but surely earned itself a cult following amongst those who grew up watching the programme, and it's garnered a few rebooted projects over the years, such as Big Finish doing a sequel series in the form of an audio production, and currently a TV show spin-off is in the works. It may be not the most flattering looking Gerry Anderson show out there, but there's still a charm to it that allures people in. Appearing in the second series of Noel Edmonds' House Party was a small game segment by the name of Got You, where celebrities were tricked into coming on a fictional children's show called Mr. Blobby, where the antics of the titular pink blob would confuse and annoy the special guest, often spoiling and ruining takes. By the end, Mr. Blobby would unmask himself, revealing that it was Noel under the costume all this time. Well, Barry Killerby was actually providing most of the physical work, before he was swapped out for Noel in the costume for the big gag surprise at the end. Despite being a joker character, the UK was hit by Blobby mania during the 90s. Mr. Blobby made numerous of TV guest appearances. He got his own single and as well a theme park, but it was not to last, as Mr. Blobby very quickly became a character the public loved to hate. Mr. Blobby never looked the most charming of children's characters. Those awkward googly eyes personally put me off, but that was always the intent, that Mr. Blobby was always meant to be a mockery of ridiculous children's characters, but ironically he became a cult character himself. Mr. Blobby still makes very frequent appearances on television, but usually treated as a punching bag.
This is your dad.
Fab Lab was a preschool series teaching young tots about basic science. The series was created by the BBC and aired between 2002 and 2006. The programme follows two pixies named Trixie and Dixie. They both live in a shed up the garden, where in every episode they're accompanied with a teacher-like figure, a dog called Prof, who's the one that educates the two pixies. Stereotypically in media, pixies are usually portrayed as little fairy-like creatures, but here, Trixie and Dixie looks like the distant cousins of Shrek. To be fair, none of the characters in the series I would describe to be particularly ugly looking, but if I've got to be honest, as a kid, Prof kind of always unsettled me. I just don't think I was ever keen on big hairy costume characters. Like Bear in the Big Blue House was another series that never quite gelled with me. I guess as a kid, I saw them more as big hairy yetis that were coming to eat me, rather than trying to befriend me. Oh, oi, hey, Bear, not so close, not so close. Just give me a bit of personal space, please. Big Babies is a British comedy series that aired in 2010 on CBBC, featuring the day-to-day life of two infants, Brooks and Rocco. With every episode they go out on some kind of day trip, infiltrated by the living talking toy named Budge, who is sent out on missions for the baby's well-being, but only usually tags along for his own intent. The baby characters, as you can see, are adult heads that are superimposed on infants' bodies. The look is certainly quite distinct. The idea for the series came from John Reach, who wanted to try out this special effect. He first tried and applied this to his music video gigs, but couldn't find a band that wanted to use it for their vids. While Big Babies only ran for one series, the creative team of Big Babies had reunited some years back to make a short film titled Top Fun, which if you like the humour of Big Babies, it's a recommended watch. The World of Peter Rabbit and Friends was a 9-part BBC television series based on the Beatrix Potter books that was made in association with Japanese companies such as Pony Canyon Inc. and my apologies if I butcher the name for this next one, Fuji's Television Network Inc. Each episode cost shy of £1 million each. This series was quite significantly popular in the UK. In fact, me and my siblings, who would have been part of the generation that grew up watching the show, were actually part of the Peter Rabbit fan club. Thus, the show is very nostalgic for me and my family. To my American viewers, this is the one animation I would point to perhaps being the most stereotypically posh British kids show you could find. The episodes are produced to a very high standard and are very wholesome in their execution, although that isn't to say that the Potter stories couldn't get very dark. Two episodes I can remember are Piglet Bland, where after getting lost travelling to market, he finds himself in the house of an old man who's rather insistent that the piglet stays with him.
I must admit to being a little hungry.
You feel nice and fat to me.
But a moment of an episode that I always found to be extremely upsetting was the one that featured Jemina Puddle Duck. In the story, Jemina wants to hatch her own eggs, but the farm she lives on doesn't allow animals to do so. Jemina soon befriends a fox, who gives her a spot to lay her eggs, but all for the interest to make Jemina his own supper. Thankfully, the farmyard dogs were able to rush in and chase the fox away, saving Jemina and her unhatched eggs. Well, that's until they rush in and eat the eggs.
Oh dear.
Well, not so much for being the heroes of the story. Although, to be fair, Jemina still has her ducklings by the end of the story, so I suppose it's not a sad ending, but goodness, it definitely went very dark near towards the end. The franchise of Wuzzle Gummidge started all the way back in 1936 as a book series, following the antics and adventures of a scarecrow sharing the same title name, Wuzzle Gummidge. It has been adapted to TV several times, the most famous rendition of which has to be the ITV series of the late 70s and 1980s, which stars Jon Pertwee as Wuzzle and only loosely follows the books. While the show was very well loved, a lot of people found the design of Wuzzle to be unconventional for a main children's character. And yeah, Wuzzle is certainly not the most handsome fella that the world has ever been blessed with, but I'm sorry. Wuzzle Gummidge is too nostalgic for me. I can't call him creepy. Wuzzle Gummidge is just one of those shows that really resonates with me.
Oi, you! Yeah, you dang wankers! I'm talking to you! Shh!
Actually, Wuzzle Gummidge was my segue show for another programme that I found out that Jon Pertwee was involved with. As a small wee lad, I was extremely keen to check it out, much to my parents' warning that it may have been too scary for me. That other classic show in question was Doctor Who, with the Pertwee serial Invasion of the Dinosaurs being my first Doctor Who episode, and I gotta say, yeah, it was quite the introduction. I consider myself a hardcore Whovian, so it must have done something right. Thank you, old Wuzzle, for introducing me to the Daleks. The Animals of Farthing Wood was an animated drama series that aired on the BBC, airing from 1993 to 1995. Based on the book series by Colin Dan. The show is about a group of animals that originated from Farthing Wood, a forest that was recently demolished by humans. Now with the animals in need of a new home, they put their differences aside and begin their long journey to White Deer Park, a nature reserve where they'll hopefully be safe forever, this being the main story arc of the first series. Although by the time they get to and settle in White Deer Park in series 2 and 3, a whole host of new problems are only awaiting the animals. While the show was aimed for a family audience and a younger viewership, the series did still not shy away from featuring death as a theme in the show. If it was either supporting or comedy characters, or even some of the animal babies, nobody was safe, being one of the darkest British kids shows ever aired. Rainbow was an ITV children's show that ran from 1972 to 1992, having 23 seasons and just over 1,000 episodes. The first 2 seasons featured David Cook as the presenter, living alongside various colourful characters. There was Duff the dog, who would sporadically make appearances in the series, and then the 2 other regular characters that would appear in every episode would be Zippy, with his design looking pretty much identical to his later appearances in the show, and the bear Bungle, where for some reason the creators gave him big, bulging, realistic looking eyes, and they give him this innocent voice, which does not go alongside the design.
Yes, Zippy. David's brought some pictures in a book to show us.
Are they all of me? No, they are not.
By season 2, Bungle's head would be remade, looking more like a teddy bear, which just fits more in line with the innocent vibes of the show. This would be mostly his consistent look throughout the rest of the series. Duffy the dog was additionally rid-awayed with, being replaced by another puppet character, a hippo by the name of George, who was initially conceived to be a rather shy and quiet character, and would go on to become one of the main core cast of the series. In the early 90s, Rainbow had a massive relaunch, ditching the live-action human host and making the puppet characters completely independent. There was a new puppet character called Cleo introduced to the show, supposed to be a rabbit. Her ears are constantly drooping down, giving her a bucket-shaped like head, and overall her design style just does not fit in, with the other characters looking like that she belongs in a completely different show. The reboot was received extremely poorly and only lasted for a year. Cleo has never reappeared in any other Rainbow media since. Ventriloquist Terry Hall was the creator of the character Lenny the Lion, who first made his TV appearance on the BBC in 1956. Mainly appearing on variety series, but did get his own spin-off show that aired in the late 50s to the early 60s. And David Bowie's father nonetheless launched the Lenny the Lion fan club. Lenny was one of the earliest UK TV kid characters that was a merchandising sensation. Speaking to several people who grew up watching Lenny the Lion, there was certainly an audience that found Lenny to be rather terrifying, feeling unease of his lifeless eyes, and were uncomfortable for what it looked like Terry Hall carrying the corpse of a lion, as his body doesn't exactly droop naturally. But believe it or not, Lenny originally had a much more scarier design. When Terry Hall originally created Lenny for theatre performances, he gave the character pointed and sharp teeth. Thankfully, a work colleague recommended him to drop the dentures. There's certainly a lot of mystique with Lenny the Lion, as there are very few episodes or clips online. Noticeably, any clips from Lenny's heyday of the 50s and 60s are completely absent to view, with many black and white episodes believed to have been long destroyed. Wasadora was a children's kids show that aired during the 1990s about a trainee's wizard, sharing the same name as the show, Wasadora. While learning her craft, she maintains the peace of the house she lives in, inhabited by a bunch of uniquely designed puppets. And when I say uniquely designed, I mean slightly uncanny. A lot of them are meant to be household appliances come to life. There's a hook hanger that mostly resides in the wardrobe, but he does occasionally pop out during the series, albeit while wearing a raincoat, to more subtly hide the puppeteer's arm, I imagine. As well, he can be extremely bossy.
That's what I mean. Don't come in through the window, come in through the door.
But I'm already inside. I don't need to come in through the door.
There's a thing called a Filbert that just speaks in baby talk. And if I had to be honest, I find him both unsettling and annoying.
That's mine. Give it here.
Most of these puppets don't seem to be much help around the house.
Oh, the door. It's your mother, Wasadora.
Isn't anyone going to answer the door?
Your mother, Wasadora.
The door, Wasadora.
Oh dear, so much to do. See how much I need a helper.
Now, to be fair, the show does look fairly enlightening. And hey, maybe some British 90s kids grew up watching the show and find it quite nostalgic and charming. It's just for any other bugger who didn't grow up watching the show and is not overly familiar with it, may find the characters like the puppets to be, well, rather foul looking. There's like a rug in the show that thinks it's a dog, and the way it lays down just doesn't look natural. About 200 episodes of the show were made, and episodes were released on VHS, but only less than a quarter of the show can be found online. Other lost media that's related to the show is that in the unaired pilot episode, that actress Kissa Booth played Wasadora. Her partner at the time, John Cleves, actually got her involved with the project. If only Andrew Sachs could have been involved in some capacity, it could have been a semi-Fawlty Towers reunion. Trapped was a BBC's kid game show that aired in the late 2000s, often considered to be one of the last truly great kid game shows ever made by the channel. The concept of the show is about 6 kids that travel to the tower, where on each floor they have to complete a challenge. But one of the kids is selected to be the saboteur, where they must spoil the game, but being careful not to be caught. By the end of each game, all the kids vote off on who they believe the saboteur to be. Whoever has the most amount of votes must be trapped in that room. But if the saboteur fails into ruining the challenge, they must be trapped in that room regardless on whoever has the most amount of votes. By the end of each show, only one child can escape, while the rest of the contestants are, well, trapped. Essentially, the program is a kid-friendly version of Saw, and an idealized creepypasta story. In fact, for a long while, this show was considered to be lost media, as for years episodes were very hard to find online, and have sporadically come on and off the internet. Teletubbies certainly on the surface appears to be the most innocent show on the list, being the BBC's attempt to make a programme directly aimed to the toddler audience. There doesn't seem to be much to dislike about the show. Well, in saying that, there was a little bit of an uh-oh episode in the series. Teletubbies doesn't really have a storyline or a traditional plot, if you will. Instead, the episodes are made up by smaller segments, sometimes shared between episodes to episodes. But the one segment that caused the big controversial stir was The Lion and the Bear, where a bear gets chased around by a lion, or how the lion refers to himself as the Scary Lion. The segment made a lot of toddlers feel unease, with the BBC receiving numerous complaints from parents. So all the episodes that had the Lion the Bear short were removed from circulation. They did try re-airing the segment, but this time with sillier voices, gentler music, and comedic sound effects, as an attempt to make it seem far less intimidating for a younger viewer, although this was only partially successful as the Pacific segment was still banned in several countries. Putting in my own 2 cents, the only reason I think this segment scared so many younger kids, because I wonder if the dialogue, "I am the scary lion," made toddlers presume that they were meant to be scared by this, as well they were still too young to watch films like The Lion King, presuming that this is what scary stuff looks like. Indigo Pipkins was Britain's answer to Sesame Street. It began airing on ITV in 1973, with the series initially centred on the man, who shared the same full name as the title, Indigo Pipkins, was a puppet maker where his creations came to life. The man who played Mr. Pipkins, George Wuzzle, would tragically die during the making of the first series. Now, he had pre-recorded some later episodes so they were able to just work around his absence by explaining that he went on a fishing holiday. But the show was doing so immensely well that they couldn't turn down the opportunity for a second series. But how were they going to manage the continuing absence of Mr. Pipkins? Well, the writers decided to include his passing into the main show, predating Sesame Street's handling of Mr. Hooper's death by many years, showing that Britain was slightly ahead of the game in terms of handling heavy subject matter for children's media.
But I don't understand. Why do people have to die? Why can't they just live forever?
The series continued forward as Pipkins, and lasted up until 1981. However, for those individuals that didn't grow up watching the show, tend to describe the puppets of the series, well, like living roadkill. Sorry, Huckley Hair, maybe you are a charming geezer in the main show, but you're definitely not a handsome bunny. And that monkey looks like a creepy dead-eyed version of that Star Wars character in episode 6. Grisly Tales for Gruesome Kids was a CITV horror stop-motion comedy series, being based on the children's book series by Jamie Ricks. The TV series took the Twilight Zone approach by telling a series of anthology stories, mainly following mischievous and bad-behaving kids, where by the end of the tales they get their comeuppance. The original run of the series had opening and closing segments at the Squeam Screen Cinema, with our presenter an old man by the name of Uncle Grizzly, accompanied with a very cutely designed spider named Spindleshakes, who would be mercifully abused by Uncle Grizzly at the end of every show. Now, while the main bulk of the episodes were just the cartoons, I gotta say, as a kid I'd always found the stop motion bits to be the most frightening portions. I got extremely upset for poor Spindles, helplessly tormented by Uncle Grizzly. Oh, so there would be a lone boy in the auditorium watching the films, with what looks to be Uncle Grizzly travelling around the aisles. Gotta say, as a young lad, I got strong vibes of Stranger Danger. But hey, the show was meant to be unsettling for younger viewers, and it definitely worked on me. Hallison and Batchelor's 1954 film Animal Farm was Britain's first animated feature, based on the George Orwell book by the same name, released 9 years prior, telling the fantasy story on what if animals were self-aware of their own strength and opposed their owner, although the story does purposely parallel Russia's history of the early 20th century, in other words, being a simplification on the Soviet Union. In fact, the movie was funded by the US CIA. They were likely involved to make this project a piece of propaganda to combat communist ideas in the West. The pig major in the story is meant to be based on Karl Marx, and his voice may remind you of a certain British Prime Minister of the time.
I have had much time for thought as I lay alone in my stall.
For those of you who don't know, Mark and Churchill were both very different intellectuals, to put it lightly.
Joy eventually said, come on, let's keep it in. You know, he may enjoy it. I don't know what his reaction was.
He sent down a message of displeasure.
Really?
Yes.
What did he say?
That we should have asked his permission to try to portray him in this game.
Putting the politics aside, with the exception of dropping several characters from the book and a more optimistic ending, the movie actually stays quite faithful to the novel, not shying away from the grim violent moments of the story. It's quite astonishing on how much they were able to get away with a G/U rating, quite similar to another British cartoon that, speaking of which, Watership Down is perhaps one of the most controversial family films to have ever been made, with the story seeing a group of surviving rabbits from a burrow trying to find a new home, but are constantly caught up by the dangers of the outside world. Much of the rabbit's situations involve a little bit of excess blood, a concerning amount where you wonder, why is this movie even rated U to begin with? The organisation that rated the movie, the BBFC, have received numerous complaints every year from upset parents that felt that they were misled by the movie's age rating. The film certainly has a lot of moments that seem a little bit inappropriate for younger viewers. But believe it or not, the director of Watership Down, Martin Rosen, would later direct another animated feature that is much more bleak and grim than Watership Down. The movie is the 1982 film The Plague Dogs, about 2 dogs that escape an animal lab and live free in the wild. The film had a PG rating, which I saw this one as a kid, but if I have to be honest, I never finished watching this one. You see, I stopped at a moment where a hunter calls over Sniffer, one of the dogs. And, well, this happened.
That's it, fella. Come on, up we go.
Yeah, I didn't go any further than after that. From other people that I've spoken to who have watched the film all the way through, they've said that this film is not an easy watch. So I certainly wouldn't recommend it to any dog lover, or animal lover for that matter. Powerful Stuff was a 1988 PSA film about the dangers of high voltage electricity that was made to be shown between young teens and young adults. The 15-minute short film follows Darren and his younger brother Tom. When Darren goes to school that day, a man by the name of Mr. Jones comes into the class, teaching the teens about the dangers of electrical insulation. But Darren doesn't exactly pay attention on what the tutor has to say. This is reflected by the finale of the short film, where Darren goes into a power grid to retrieve a football. But after accidentally coming in contact with one of the metal grids, Darren is literally shocked and collapsed to the ground. The younger brother Tom quickly rushes to his aid into the dangerous electrical site. Darren's mates rush into the scene and try and stop Tom going any further, but it's too little too late.
No door!
Well, I suppose if you're going to make a PSA for younger viewers, you might want to hammer in the message by making it something memorable, but damn! The finale was edited down to be a standalone ad on its own, broadcast on television. For a long while, you could only view this PSA in this extremely condensed version, but YouTuber Ephemeral Films, who specialises in PSA videos, uploaded the full short film. Now, before we get to number 1, I just want to make a quick honourable mention. This entry ever so nearly made the list, but it wasn't exactly creepy or disturbing, so I left it out in the end. But I think some of you may say that it's still inappropriate to be part of children's media. Take a look for yourself. Letterland is a book series designed to educate small children their ABCs and learning to read and write, with every letter of the alphabet having a personality. Annie Apple, Bouncing Ben, Clever Cat, Dippy Duck, Eddie Elephant, and etc, being pretty self-explanatory, of the characters starting with the same letter of their respected alphabet. Creator of the series, Lynn Wendon, must have found it fairly challenging for when she had to design characters starting with letters that are used less frequently in the English language. Like the letter X is not exactly spoiled for choices. So what did she conjure up when she came round to that letter? Why, 2 cousins, named Max and Maxine, referred to as the Kissing Cousins. As a notable trait of theirs is when they're writing cards to one another, they usually sign off the message by leaving loads of X's, traditionally representing kisses in a letter. Now, before I go any further, let me just give some clarity that in the UK, it's completely legal to kiss or even marry your cousin, but in other places like America, the law does vary from state to state. And for immature adults, they may do a double take if you mention to them kissing cousins out of context. By 2003, Letterland garnered a reimagining, with many of the characters receiving a new design, or were completely reworked from the ground up, such as the Kissing Cousins being swapped out for Fixing Mike. Although this time round you couldn't have done it where it's more directly linked to the letter X, like a xylophone or an ox. And if you've enjoyed the video so far and you want to see more like it, then please consider subscribing down below, as it would be very much appreciated if you can join me along the journey of covering more weird and obscure media. Right, without any further ado, let's head to number 1. Due to the enlightened success of the Wallace and Gromit shorts around about the Christmas season, the BBC were most keen and interested to commission other animations for the holiday block. And while none of the other projects came to the same peak of popularity as the Wallace and Gromit franchise, there has been one other from that era that has remained to be extremely memorable, that being the TV movie The Secret Adventures of Tom Thumb. It began life as a 10-minute short and was going to be shown in BBC's 2 Christmas programming, but when the channel saw the final product, they turned it down for being too dark. But after having a successful run around several animation festivals, the BBC commissioned a fully length TV movie to be aired around about the Christmas season of 1993. This was another one I saw as a wee lad, and I gotta say, as a kid that was too scared to watch a program like Scooby-Doo, I was not ready for this movie. The film is set in this post-apocalyptic, dying fantasy world, where a human couple have a very unique and small child named Tom. The family seem to be rather content, but it's sadly short-lived, as Tom is taken away to a lab filled with other unfortunate creatures that are grisly experimented on. Thankfully for Tom, some kind of cyborg lizard is kind enough to help him out of the lab. When they get to the outside world, they encounter a whole village of tiny people like Tom. They embrace Tom straight away, but not so much for his lizard friend. Oh, that was a bit unkind, don't you think? Poor little bugger didn't even make it halfway through the film. Yeah, this is a very unsavoury movie. The film was animated by stop motion, but used the distinct technique of pixelation, where you essentially use the live-action human actors as stop-motion puppets. The special is overall very ambitious, of having live-action humans alongside stop-motion models on set. It's quite a marvel to behold and gives the special a unique style, but also the uncanny movements of the humans only further add to the whole dark atmospheric tone of the whole film. If you're into dark and creepy animations, then this is a high recommendation. Or if you're a light-hearted individual, minor spoiler warning, there is no happy ending.